There is a top prospect available for trade in the NHL that makes sense for the Sabres, plus a mailbag to get to on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase, we are going to dip into the mailbag today on today's episode of the show, as we are well in the middle of games between the Sabres and the Sharks. And next week, the Sabres return home against Dallas for an extended homestand of 4 games. The All-Star game in the middle. A lot of time to get to some other stuff, including a very interesting trade topic that is kind of revolving around the league at this point in time. Some reminders. If you want to get in on the mailbag or you want to get in your takes on the show, be sure to check us out on our text line. We try to go back and forth as much as possible, always trying to respond to everybody that reaches out. Join subtext.com/lockedonsabres. Become a sortie today. We don't have games to react to a lot this week, but we do have a lot of trade discussion happening in our group chat this week for sure. And we've got a lot to get to on a subject of a Columbus Blue Jacket prospect, especially when it comes to trading. If you missed our last episode, check it out on this channel, wherever you're listening right now. Go one before YouTube channel. You can like and subscribe us there on the coach idea of either Lindy Ruff, Rod Brindamore, Gerard Gallant, Seth Appert. I threw Mark Savard's name in there. Other names are potentially out there as well. If the Sabres were to move on from Don Granato, which I told you on that show, if it were to happen, I would imagine it would be after the season, but you never know. Right now, the betting favorite to be the next coach fired is Don Granato. Yesterday, when I did the show, I told you Lindy Ruff was the second leading favorite to be the next coach fired. Those odds were since updated. Lindy's now third. Kings head coach Todd McClellan is now second on the next coach fired odds. So maybe he's an idea for you. Let me know what you think. I'm getting a lot of love on the Lindy idea. A lot of people, I think it hits home, right? It's one from the heart. He's the right type of coach, I think, for what a lot of fans would like to see. Should Granato get fired and they want to do something different, which would be what? A veteran coach, a proven winner. It doesn't even have to be a Stanley Cup proven winner. You just need a playoff caliber proven winner, and that certainly is Lindy. Looking at some of the discussion that some of our texters threw in, absolutely big fans of Lindy. One listener threw out, Lindy idea is perfect. Beyond it actually makes a ton of sense. It's also the perfect PR play from the perspective of Terry Pegula, an absolute hand washing. The move wasn't Pegula, but this would be nothing like bringing in Marv Levy as GM of the Bills, for example. These guys need a father figure. Don is the older brother in a family that only recently decided to have more children. Okay, interesting terminology there, but I kind of get it, right? And I do think it's very different than when Marv Levy came back to the Bills as general manager in his 80s, and that was a strict PR move. The Bills were doing things like that. I don't think this would be that. I think that's a cherry on top. Right? It would make fans happy and it would instill some artificial confidence. But at the same time, there are reasonable ideas that I got into on that last show on why it actually makes sense. And again, I'm even willing to talk about Lindy as an idea because Devils fans want him out. He's the third leading favorite to be fired, and you can foresee a scenario in which he would be available while the Sabres have an opening. More on that in our last show. We'll get into more from our text line and our mailbag segment coming up in a little bit, but I do want to dive in on a prospect that is available for trade that a lot of guys writing about the Sabres have dove in on, including Chad DeDominicis from Expected Buffalo, who is a fan of this idea. He wrote extensively about it at expectedbuffalo.com. Check out their subtext if you want more details on Chad's his take on this idea. I'll give you mine, though. Before that, let's get some background. Who is this guy? A lot of Sabre fans might be listening right now, don't even know who I'm talking about, in part because this guy hasn't really played in the National Hockey League. He's played 40 games in 2 seasons in the National Hockey League. David Jiricek, a Czech defenseman, right shot defenseman, which we all know are at a premium in today's NHL because the good ones are getting rarer and rarer. He's big, 6'3", 210 pounds at 20 years old, might even get bigger in terms of, his bulk in the next couple of years. He is a big, can play physical, but also pretty good skater, good puck mover, has a little bit of offensive game to his repertoire, big shot, big one-timing shot. And he is available because he's upset. He's upset with the Columbus Blue Jackets. He has been down with the Cleveland Monsters of the AHL for pretty much all last year. Played 55 games, by the way. I mentioned he's got a little offensive game. As a rookie big defenseman in the AHL at 19 years old. I told you how Jiri Kulich with 27 goals was historically good for a rookie forward in the AHL. Well, last year, Jiriceck was that forward defenseman, offensively at least, with 38 points in 55 games. This year, he's only played 4 games in the AHL, and he has 3 assists. 36 games with the Blue Jackets, but he's been up and down. He's been scratched. He's been sent down. He's been called up without playing games at either location, traveling back and forth. And finally, David Jiricek said, you might not like this, but at 20 years old, he said, I've had enough. What is happening here? The Blue Jackets stink. Their defensemen aren't very good. And I should be playing. I should be developing. Why am I sitting in the press box? Why am I not playing hockey at either place, AHL or NHL? He wants to be in the NHL, of course, though. And before I get to his comments on this, is he in the right? I think yes. I think smart people think yes. He's one of the Blue Jackets' best 6 defensemen at the least. Frank Saravelli of Daily Faceoff said on Jiriceck, quote, you can make the argument he's the second best D-man on the Blue Jackets today behind Zach Werenski. So Saravelli said that. There are other analytics sites that have kind of pointed that out as well. There are other people who just watch the Blue Jackets that are like, yeah, this guy should be in the NHL all along. And it's a lot of criticism right now that is being directed at Blue Jackets management for what are you doing? Why are you playing around with this kid? I mean, you might not like that he's demanding a trade right now, even though he's not entirely doing that. But why are you playing around? Why is Jarmo Kekalainen calling him up, sending him down, scratching him? When it's pretty clear you're a bad team. I mean, how far out? I didn't even pull this up because they're so far out. They're behind the Sabres by a wide margin for a playoff spot. The Columbus Blue Jackets, who, by the way, this is a trend. Every year, there's a different talented player in Columbus that wants out. And we've often made it about the city and the market, but Jiriceck's maybe pointing to, guys, it's the management. These guys are clowns up there in Columbus. The Blue Jackets right now are 17 points out of a playoff spot. And this kid was picked 6th overall 2 years ago, was great in the AHL last year, is one of your 6 best defensemen. How in the world is he not in the lineup every night, getting as many minutes as possible to develop him? Because they clearly need help. 40 points in 49 games, a record of 15, 24, and 10. Jiriceck says this on his situation in Columbus. Quote, I played good hockey in the NHL. I'm an NHL player right now. That's my opinion, that I should be in the NHL right now. I see guys from the same draft, 2022 he's talking about, like Simon Nemec and Korchinski. They get a chance on the power play. They play a ton of minutes in the NHL. Those are different teams, so different situations, but I can compare with them. I just want a chance to play like that. They told me the last game was not good enough for me. I told them I don't think so, but that's your opinion. That's Jiriceck on his current situation in Columbus. I mean, again, I understand a fan out there that goes, who's this kid? Thinks he's on top of the world, thinks he has the right to demand what his franchise does with him. I get it on some level. He's also very correct. There's no reason why he shouldn't be playing. There's no reason why he should be getting power play minutes. The guy should be exposed to, I mean, in the Sabres with Don Granato, the one thing Granato's at least done is when he's got young players, he's exposed them to develop them. And that's where the Sabres come in. David Jiricek as a trade. Why it makes sense for the Sabres, why I really, really, really like this idea for the Sabres, and what it would cost. And I think that part is actually easy for this trade between the Sabres and the Blue Jackets, hypothetically. We'll get to that coming back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, so stay tuned. We're brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, all about scoring the best seat on the couch and grabbing your favorite football snacks, placing some super bets as well. FanDuel, so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. You've got lots of action that you can look at. You've got touchdown props. You've got over-unders. You've got you could move the spread on whatever team you want. It's not just the betting. It's the game, food, commercials, and plenty more. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also does have plenty more options available. New customers, join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is also brought to you by Factor. Get started on your resolutions with Factor. It's not too late. We're not even a month in for your resolutions, so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning. It sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, the prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. Over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options for keto, calorie smart, vegan and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons. You'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolution. Forget frantic lunch preps and rush dinners. Factor's 2-minute meals are your secret weapon in the new year. Fuel up fast with restaurant-quality meals, all delivered right to your door. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50. Use the code LockedOnNHL50, and you're going to get half off, 50% off. That's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50. Same slash after the site, same code word for Factor, and get 50% off today. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. When you're done with us, if you want to get your football fix, head over to YouTube. Check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. David Jiricek, rookie defenseman, a 6th overall pick from the 2022 NHL draft. A high pick, a skilled player, a big player, and a player that has some real potential in the NHL. We're talking potential here because the guy's only played 40 games. In those 40 games, if you're wondering, doing some research on both the numbers and what people that cover the Blue Jackets have said about him, is a little too early for him to say that the offensive game has transitioned, but there's time for that between the AHL and the NHL. And again, maybe he should be getting power play minutes that would help that along. But anyways, where he has played really well is in his own zone. He's been very good in his own zone. He doesn't get pushed around. He's already very big for his age at 6'3", 210. So the size is there, the physicality is there, and you see signs of the offensive game, and you saw it at the AHL level to make you think that that's going to get better and better as time goes on. He, by the way, if you're wondering, went 3 picks ahead of Matthew Savoie in the 2022 NHL draft. So it went Jiriceck, a couple more guys, then Savoie, and the Sabres went on to pick Noah Ostlund at 16 and Jiri Kulich at 28. So, why I like this trade for the Sabres. The Sabres have arguably the best prospect pool in the National Hockey League, right? And if not the best, because, maybe top heavy, it's not on par with some other teams, it's certainly the deepest. But where is it deep? It's only really at one unit. It's at forward. The Sabres have a lot of forward prospects. You've got Matthew Savoie and Ostlund and Kulich. You've got Zach Benson, who's up here now playing. You've got Isak Rosen playing well in Rochester. You've got guys that were picked in the second and third round that are developing really well, like Victor Nuchev and many others. Anton Wahlberg, who just had a pretty good World Juniors. They're so deep. I mean, they are 10 deep. But really, with the first round caliber guys, they're especially deep on that front. So, and that doesn't even mention, your Jack Quinns, JJ Peterka, so I would graduate beyond prospect status at this point. I wouldn't really think about trading them anyway. Where the Sabres are not very deep is the blue line, right? Who are the Sabres' top defensive prospects? I mean, they just picked Maxim Strebak in the second round this past draft. Second round picks, though, are a crapshoot. You never know. Remember when Brendan Gooley had this great development track as a second round pick, and we were all excited for him to be a top 4 defenseman, and he showed up and he couldn't even play in the NHL, and he didn't have any NHL career. So Maxim Strebak's probably your best defensive prospect right now, with Ryan Johnson now in the NHL level and a little bit older anyway. Past that, we're talking guys, Gavin McCarthy was a third round pick. Like, we're talking third round and later, which is such a lottery ticket. They don't have that high-end defensive prospect, but they've got 5 forwards that are. And what I've said on this podcast and on my show in WGR so many times is there's got to be a 2-for-1 trade somewhere down the road, a hockey trade, something. Forward to better forward, or forward to defenseman, or forward to goaltender. There's just too many. They can't all make the team. If Savoie progresses and Kulich's an NHL player and Ostlund's an NHL player and Rosen's an NHL player, sorry, there ain't enough room. I'm out of spots because their top 6 is already filled up. And their third line, if they're going to keep Mittelstadt around, is already half filled up, if not entirely filled up, honestly. What? All those skill players are competing for fourth line spots in the future? That's not happening. So there has to be a trade eventually. Well, here's an opportunity to not do a 2-for-1 trade, but do a swap, 1-for-1. A version of way back when, the Zach Kassian for Cody Hodgson trade. What was that deal at the time when Darcy Regier made it a decade ago? It was Darcy saying to Vancouver, I don't have any top forward. I don't have any top center prospects. I got some wingers. I got Marcus Foligno developing back there as a power forward. What do you say I give you my number 1 winger prospect? You give me your number 1 center prospect. That's what this would be. It would be the Sabres calling Jarmo Kekalainen saying, I know you got this defenseman. It's got a lot of potential, and we know how high you picked him, and you're not going to want to give him away for nothing, but he's unhappy. I don't know why you're not playing him, but he's unhappy. Here's what we'll do for you. You need offensive skill. Columbus needs everything, by the way. What we're going to do is we're going to let you get out of that situation. We are going to let you, completely bypass this headache. But we're going to give you value on the player. We're not even going to take advantage of you. We're not, because you got the depreciating asset and we don't. We don't even care. We're just going to give you Matthew Savoie for David Jiricek. That's it. He went 3 picks after. And he's had a fine development. It's not been Zach Benson level, but it's gone fine. He was pretty good at the World Juniors. He's dominated the junior leagues again. And he's still very much on track to be a top 6 player in the NHL. And he's got tons of offensive talent, so the ceiling is there. We're going to give you the guy that went 3 picks after Jiriceck, who has told you he's unhappy. We're going to rid you of that situation. We're going to get a right shot defenseman, and that's a player we don't have in our system that in a high level like that. And that's it. 1-for-1. Columbus might not get a better offer than that. And if they don't like Savoie, if they prefer Kulich, like the Sabres have a giant prospect store. And if Kekalainen walks in the door, he could shop around. He could go to the skilled forward section, little forward section, and there's Matthew Savoie. He could go to the sniper section over here, aisle 8, and he can go get Jiri Kulich. He can go to aisle 6, where he's got a more of a center and a playmaker in Noah Ostlund. Like, you could just take your pick. You're not getting Zach Benson, though. That's where I draw the line. You're not getting Zach Benson. He is the number one Sabre forward prospect. He made the league as an 18-year-old after being the 13th pick. That's where you draw the line. You're not getting Peterka. You're not getting Quinn. That's too far. You can have Savoie. You can have Kulich. You can have Rosen. And you know what? If you find a bunch of bidders for Jiriceck, we'll throw a second-round pick on top, or we'll throw some change, even to make you look good. Like, oh, we got more than what we wanted, or we got more than just a one-for-one hockey trade. Whatever. If it's a token pick like that, let them have it, because that trade makes a lot of sense for the Sabres positionally. And I would hope that they would do it. I think he would play in their top 6 immediately. He should, at least. Right shot. I mean, they're nowhere with that right now. All their top defensemen for the future are left shot guys. Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, Johnson. Right now, those 4 are, at the moment, the future of the Sabres on defense. All 4 are left shot guys. Right shot, you've got Henry Jokiharju, and not much after that. Right? It's really not much after that. They need a guy like David Jiricek in the system. They should pull that trade off. Go call Columbus. Even though he's a young guy and he's not helping the veteran factor and, the win now factor. It makes too much sense for their future to not try that trade. When we come back, a couple of mailbag questions, including, is JJ Peterka going to get an extension before Casey Mittelstadt? That's one question I got from a listener that I'm going to tackle. Jack Quinn and whether he's injury prone, and also a little bit on the deadline. All coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors, everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Reminder, check us out on our text line. Become a sorority today at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. You hit the subscribe button there. You get it advanced to your phone, and you just text from there. You don't need an app. Once you sign up on the internet, you can do it on your browser and your phone. You don't need an app. You can just, it's a text. That's it, text line. If you remember the old WGR text line, that's what we're trying to recreate, because I had a lot of fun with that back in the day. And I know we don't have it now over at the station, but I thought it was a good idea for this podcast, and I've had a lot of fun with it, and hope those that have participated have as well. So from our text line, looking through some mailbag questions in the past couple of days that I found really interesting. I want to start with one in particular, because a lot of these questions I throw out to the texters like, hey, throw some mailbag questions my way. We'll answer them on the show. And there's some repeats, right? I get some Mittelstadt questions. I get some Granato questions, Adams, Pagula. Here's one that only one person sent in that I hadn't seen from anybody else. And I'm kind of mad at myself for not even thinking about it. Because, listen, this team is an eyesore, right? They're not fun to watch. They're not fun to think about in your spare time. But Sabre fans are diehard, and they want to see this team do well, and it's why we're able to have a podcast like this, despite a 13-year playoff drought. But I'm trying to come up with content, right, for a bunch of shows every week, and this is one where I'm like mad I didn't think of this like a month ago. But I'm glad a texter sent it in, and maybe we'll talk more about it, not just now, but in future episodes. One texter sent in, wouldn't be surprised if the Sabres give JJ Peterka the long-term extension at like $6.5 million AAV, while they give Quinn some 2-year bridge deal with his injury concerns. Quinn will be having his 3rd major surgery before he turned 23. I'm going to get to more on his question in a second, but let's start with what he just said. He or she said. JJ Peterka on a long-term extension. Now, I don't know about $6.5 million. Maybe. Oh, of course they're going to do that. Aren't they going to do that before or instead of paying Casey Mittelstadt? Here's why I say that. Because both guys, I mean, those have been the Sabres' two most reliable offensive players all year. Mittelstadt, I think, has been their best all-around forward and their best playmaker. Peterka has been their best goal scorer. The difference is age. The difference is age, and the difference is where you're at with the guy after you extend them, after the extension is over. Right now, Casey Mittelstadt's 25 years old. I don't know. 25. He wasn't drafted by Kevin Adams. He's been great. He's developed a ton under Granato and Adams. So I don't want to disparage Mittelstadt. He's been awesome this year. But it's weird to me that they haven't talked to him. That came out from Lance Lysowski a couple weeks ago and Mittelstadt, that they haven't talked to him about an extension. Meanwhile, Peterka, they just drafted. They just developed. He took the step. Like, there was never any anger at Peterka. There was never any misstep by Peterka. You know, Mittelstadt arrived and it didn't go well, and it didn't go well again, and it didn't go well again, and then he got going. And I don't think that's necessarily has to be a problem, but you're just getting more upside with Peterka. You know, if you pay for Mittelstadt, you're paying for what you're getting. You know what he is. This is it. This is the best it's going to be, and that's what you're paying for. At least with Peterka, 3 years younger, you're paying for him now, and I don't know, there could be another step. So yeah, go pay him. I don't think 6.5 is right, but maybe 5.5. Go pay Peterka $5.5 million. It doesn't have to go this way, but you very well could see him in a couple years become an even better player, or even next year become even better, earn more than what he's worth on that dollar. Right now, he's on a 30-plus goal pace. I don't think he could be a 40-goal scorer, but I'm open to it. Mittelstadt, we know what he is. This is the best he'll get. There's no star potential there. It's just a really darn good player. So I think Peterka over Mittelstadt. They could pay both. I might want to guess they don't, though. That they'll pick one of those two to give a long-term extension. I agree with the texter that they will give Quinn a bridge deal because of the injuries. Now, the other thing I wanted to get to real quick on his text was, how much longer until Jack Quinn's getting the Tim Connolly allegations of a skilled player who just can't stay healthy? The big difference there, Tim Connolly had concussion problems. And in the NHL, it's different from football and other sports. When you have a history of ligament issues, you could still have a very productive career. Joe Thornton did it. He tore his ACL when he's like 35 or something, and he played a bunch more productive seasons. Like, you can overcome knee injuries in the NHL more so than other sports, and even Achilles injuries. But concussions, that's one that could really derail your entire career. So in that way, I think Quinn is very different from Connolly because of the type of injury. I would expect Quinn to bounce back, and I would not assume he would get injured again, even though it's possible. One other question that I want to get to from a texter, which is just pretty simply, like, what are we thinking about the trade deadline right now? And just to kind of touch on this once in a while, once per week, I don't expect anything. Maybe a Mittelstadt trade. I think they'll sell their spare parts like Eric Johnson, maybe Zemgus Girgensons, or even maybe Kyle Okposo. But they're not going to get a premium asset at this deadline back unless they trade Casey Mittelstadt. Or our idea from the start of the show, maybe David Jiricek turns into a deadline deal. That's when the Zach Cassidy and Cody Hodson trade happened way back when. Maybe we see the Sabres try to pull that off before the deadline. Before we wrap up, want to remind you, check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube, first 24/7 streaming channel for sports all through the day on YouTube. Our Sabres droughtology of the day. I missed getting to that earlier. I've got it for you right at the end. How long has it been since the Sabres were last in the playoffs? The Buffalo Sabres have not been in the playoffs in 4,662 days. Here's your droughtology of the day. The last Sabre playoff game was 2 nights before Michael Scott's final episode of The Office aired. We've all watched The Office, or a lot of us, thousands of times since that happened. Not only was The Office still running when the Sabres were last in the playoffs, Michael Scott hadn't even left the show yet. Steve Carell was still on the show. And then they went 2.5 more years after that before wrapping up the show. That's how long it's been. The Office, that went off the air a decade ago, was not even really that close yet to being done with the last time the Sabres were in the playoffs. That's your Sabres Droughtology of the day. Always love our suggestions for facts on how long it's been on the Sabres. All right. That'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. I'm efforting to get a Blue Jackets guest on the podcast to talk more about Jiriceck, get more of an inside scoop. So we'll do that in a little bit coming up this week. We'll talk more All-Star stuff as well, and we'll see if we can get anything more newsworthy on the Sabres in the coming days. So we'll have some fun leading into Saturday's All-Star game. Thanks for listening. Check us out on our YouTube if you listen to the show. Like and subscribe there, and hit our text line up at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. We'll talk to you next time here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.